Hello, hello.
Hey there.
Hi. How's it going, everybody?
Good. Hi, Ivan. Good to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time.
I saw Ivan earlier today with his nice new air conditioner installed.
Very nice.
Now that all the heat's gone.
Yeah, new air conditioner.
Yeah, now that
Very
it's
nice.
down. And how are you, Benji?
I'm here. I'm just a gray square.
Okay, hello, Gray Square. How are things?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad.
Awesome. Awesome.
Benji's got his air conditioner behind him also.
Yeah, mine's a simpler, older design.
Yeah, those definitely exist. Yeah.
Here I am sitting in the middle of the desert with a sweater on because my office is like 69 degrees.
I know. Well, I was on a call. So yeah, Anthony's in Vegas. I was on a call with somebody else in Vegas 2 days ago, and they're like, yeah, it's I think 114 degrees Fahrenheit is what they said. I'm like, wait, are humans even capable of living when the temperature hits that?
Well,
wild.
in Vegas, every single house has always been built with really good central AC.
It would have
centralized.
to.
Yeah, most houses have 2 units. And when I lived in Seattle, everyone complained. Like I was fortunate when I moved out there to get a condo or apartment that had centralized cooling.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize that most people in Seattle did not have that. Most people just have heating and no cooling. And people would complain it would be like 95 degrees outside, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's so hot, I can't stand it." And I would just laugh at them, like, "Guys, this is nothing. It's 120 in Las Vegas, where I'm from." But I didn't realize nobody else had cooling in their house, so their homes were like 98 degrees. That's brutal.
We put a thermometer out in our conservatory because we thought it was going a bit warm in there, and it exploded. It literally exploded.
Nice. Oh, wow. Okay, good times. All right. Well, I guess we're going to talk about some metadata over introspection.
Hi, guys.
Looking forward.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Roman. How are you?
All right. How are you guys?
Doing well.
Burned by the heat in
Yes.
Europe? That's what you were talking about?
Yeah. The heat all over the place. Yeah. Europe had different parts of Europe had quite the heat spell as well. So, yeah.
We're a little bit higher than average, but we're okay.
Yeah. Awesome. And hello, Michael.
But I mean, Seattle is always like Britain, no?
Rain,
basically. Yeah.
There's rain there. I'm in Canada myself, and I'm surrounded by a lot of rain right now. So we actually just had a freak hailstorm for some reason. So it's bizarre. At least it's not snow. We're okay.
And I'm in Britain, and it hasn't rained for ages.
Yeah,
which is actually quite painful. I want it to do rain.
Yeah. Great. Well, where do we want to start?
By the way, sorry if I have an echo. If it's too problematic, I will switch a room. So just say if it will create a lot of issues.
Oh, we can hear you. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Do we have a note stock for this, Ivan?
Oh no, and I don't actually. Yeah.
Do you want me to create one?
Yeah, totally right. Feel free. And so I think we can start with a couple of organizational questions. First, I didn't specify how much time this meeting will take. So what's your time limits? And we'll choose ones that accommodate everybody.
I have to jump off in an hour, unfortunately, but that's just me, and I can catch up on anything I miss. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think 1 hour is a good starting point, and I think we can discuss a lot in 1 hour.
Great.
Everyone have 1 hour, right? So it's not limited on everyone. Okay. So
I can stay longer, no problem.
Second issue I asked in the thread, do we need a working group or like subcommittee, or we'll do it like similar to input unions? So more like brainstorm and with smaller number of people and moving faster.
I would go with the input union approach because I mean it's one topic, but at one point we have solved it. Like with the other subcommittees, it's more like because it's ongoing, no? Like GraphQL over HTTP, we are constantly adding things to that, or also the graphical user group, working group.
Yeah, so I also feel like the same. Hopefully, it would be like short sequence of calls, and we come with solution. And desired outcome is not separate document. Desired outcome, we have something, solution to a problem, and no further calls. So yeah, and by the way, we can start group at any point. Third issue. We need to call this initiative somehow, and like I know, Roman, you oppose like custom metadata.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, can we?
No, but it's more about technicalities that to understand. Actually, we can call the group meetings or the problem custom metadata.
Okay. Yes, because and like though I think the last organizational point, everybody kind of familiar with input union workflow, how it was done with input, right? Or maybe like Anthony or Roman wasn't part of this working group when it happened. It was like a year or two ago. So we have a bunch of competent solutions for a long time, and we basically stuck. And to solve this issue, we choose to instead of having like compare each solution one-to-one, we agreed to have one definition, one problem statement, one solution criteria, one document with problem statement, solution criteria, and different solutions. So each solution had its own PR or issue or RFC document, but it was one common place to solve like common problems. So basically, if we feel like we're solving the same issue, we create a document describing this and discuss a different technical solution to the same problem, and use the same criteria as solution criteria. I think it's the only possible way forward here that I see. Anybody have thoughts on like how to do that? Okay.
I think the idea is really good. I liked the way input union went, although it's not solved yet, and Benji comes up with new things.
Yeah.
But in the end, it got such a good big picture of the problem. Like what do we actually want to solve, and then what are the downsides of each of the solutions? And the matrix that we came up with was quite good. So going this way, I would also support that.
I'd like to comment. So what to emphasize one thing, that while this input union problem probably something like, I would say, nice to have. It's not to diminish importance or anything, but this problem here that I see a big deficiency with kind of urgent and we need to solve it, kind of come up with solution. and go, because this is something that is a big surprise for people, as I write in my post on this subject, that it doesn't work this way. For example, that it's very similar, this facility, or even if not similar, there are these facilities in other languages platforms. They work very well, and they are definitely missing in GraphQL. So kind of from the point of view of urgency and need, that kind of gives me hope, and that we will solve it quickly, hopefully. As for different ways, probably, yeah, as I said, we need to kind of explore and analyze several approaches, mainly to depth, and then choose which one we think is better.
Yes, so to clarify my point, core idea about this thing is to have common problem statement and common solution criteria. And before we start discussing solution, like competing solution, we need to agree what we're solving. And yeah, so this is like approach that I propose, and spend like first first non-technical agenda items. First like agenda item is to discuss like solution criteria, brainstorm.
Yeah, I also wouldn't mind if we take a few extra rounds. I know that this is missing, but I wouldn't say it's that urgent, because there are workarounds for that. And we did a couple of implementations already. Like we and GraphQL Java did the applied directives approach, and it has a couple of downsides. And when we put it in the spec, we cannot take it back. So we shouldn't rush it. I mean, there are workarounds. I would not rush it.
At the same time, I agree with Roman. So basically, you put it, something can become de facto specification. So if de facto applied directives became a standard way, it's also an equal issue.
It's three big implementations have it already, but I mean, all of them have it as an opt-in. So I wouldn't say it's a de facto standard.
So it's similar.
Yeah,
to...
but excuse me, Michael. Sure. So when you already implemented this, there are, and you present it as workaround. When framework implements, that's not exactly workaround. Workaround is if I'm doing something tricky with my particular server. That works.
It's
actually.
Not a workaround. No, I didn't mean that as a workaround.
Yeah, but
I didn't mention
it's actually feature proof, right? I look at, if you did implement this, that's kind of halfway proof that it works, right?
No, it doesn't work. There are a couple of so you can implement something, but then you see the problems. There is good advice, like if you look at language designer, C# designers, they try things out, and sometimes you see that it's not good, and you pull it. And this is one thing where I found in the implementation detail with double serialization and things like that, that it's actually not nice to use, and has a couple of problems that you only discover on runtime, where you could have a fully static solution. But I mean, that's already the details. We should go through them. That's why I think we should iterate over that correctly. With workarounds, I mean, the workarounds that we have, like if you look, for instance, Apollo Federation, they essentially wrap the SDL and transport it over the service layer. You can essentially fetch the SDL over GraphQL. we do something similar for schema stitching and things like that. Relay has client-side schemas where they put their things in. So there are workarounds, different workarounds for each framework. So I didn't mean applied directive as a workaround. That was like an experiment to see if that works out.
Yeah. Okay.
But it doesn't. I think it doesn't. But I think we should discuss that. And that's why it would be good to have the matrix to see what actually is not good with this approach. And what would a different approach bring us more, or what benefits would we get from that?
May I suggest one more thing that, for example, one problem I think we're facing with any approach, at least with applied directives and metatypes, is the problem of returning input types and untyped values and so on. And I think we should, when we talk of either solution, we should kind of establish that this is problem for any solution, right? And probably express that should become an issue in general, a separate issue. Looks like there is a need for this. It pops up here and there, and this is the case that we are facing, is one of the illustration cases when it's needed.
That's actually, I mean, I just read your comment on the discussion. That's one of the reasons why we have this as. So you essentially say this input is represented as that output. That is one of the solution approaches that is there for this. There's another one that Benji is working on, structs, for instance. That's a more generalized way where you say, okay, we have object structures that exist on the input and on the output, has also downsides, has plus sides. I mean, all these things have. And that's why I think it's important to look at that closely, because that could be a solution also for other things. I agree.
I'm betting on this struct thing, that in the end it will help with our problem, whatever path.
I'm proposing like criteria that we judge final solution. So like as a first round, after we define like criteria and define solutions, we assume you can add anything to GraphQL spec, like struct, and we discuss like, because it creates a loop, basically. Like for example, let's use benches proposal sets. We discussed it. It's a loop. Struct solution for metadata required new struct, and introspection is one of the use case for that struct. So instead of focusing on it, let's assume we can add anything to a spec, and when we finalize it, we basically like see if this feature can be added into a spec or not. So I'm like, let's judge. So for example, for Benji's solution, let's judge is based on struct being in a spec.
You mean assume?
Assume, yeah. By judge, I mean like when we go to something like a matrix, we make a points based on that. If we decide that, because we assume struct is useful, I think we all agree that we should not add mechanisms, generic mechanism with single use case. So if struct is useful beyond introspection and have use cases beyond introspection, it should be added. It should be added like independently of introspection. So I don't want to make this course or this document focused on that. So that's why let's assume like we can add anything to a spec. And second thing, what I want to propose is to focus on what we want to achieve, not how we want to achieve. So example here, what we want to achieve, we want value to be typed. And we should discuss if we all agree it's like requirement. It's what we want. And if we agree on that, we can discuss solution and how it's solved in different approaches. Is it, it's like types that isomorphic types that work both as input output, is it at S, is it like some other solution. So I'm proposed before we dive deep into thing, I wrote a like draft document with criteria I have in my mind, but before we jump into it, actually, like I think it would be fair and more productive if you give your ideas of what solution criteria you want, and we discuss it and add to a document, and and then maybe I will add something that I have.
Ivan, if you already have something, why don't you just share it, and then we'll go over it and maybe add things.
Yeah,
I think it's a good starting point if you already have made some thoughts on that. It's easier than.
Yeah, sure.
Is it what one of your slides in your presentation?
No.
Or something like that.
Yeah, I just published it just before. I actually wanted to write a normal document, but yeah, I had like some time limitation things. So I have only like really early draft, basically names of criteria. I send it one more time in the chat. So we can start with it, but also feel free to suggest you want or like reformulate. And also note, I specifically mark with pair as a draft. So and I created as a branch. So additional pairs are welcome, and we can, as aftermath of this discussion, we can change it, remove or add stuff.
I imagine, excuse me, I imagine that the discussion will be getting quite interesting. So help on taking the notes on this would help us to capture any changes that need to be made. So please, I have sent the Google Doc link into the chat. So do open that up and dive in. I don't see in there that the metadata should be representable like nicely in SDL. I know you've said it as part of introspection, but I wonder whether that one was accidentally missed.
Yeah, accidentally missed. Yeah, good catch. Yeah, we discussed, I even had it in a slide and we discussed it a bunch of times. Yeah, just.
I know you and I have discussed it many times, so it's definitely needed.
Yeah.
One of the things that we did when we were doing the input unions is we came up with these criteria and then we gave them weightings. Now, the weightings are very controversial because different people think that their thing is the most important thing, whereas other people think that it doesn't matter at all. So we kind of tried to do it based on a kind of a consensus, but I think it was the champion in the end who decided what those weightings are. So I imagine there'll be some fun discussions. But what I will say is In the early stages of input union, what we did is we just came up with all the criteria that we thought we might want. We did not filter them based on quality. We didn't argue about them. We put them all in the document, and then we went through afterwards and said, actually, I don't think this is something we care about, or this is, you know, this is a nice to have, but whatever, or like, yeah, this is obviously critical. Like, we cannot have a solution that doesn't pass this criteria. So I suggest that we do that same pattern, i.e., don't worry about the importance of them. Just if you think it's a requirement that we have, put it in the document, and later we'll go through and assign weighting to it.
Yeah, and order is totally random. So like, if anybody, yeah, so like, let's use the first one. So everybody kind of agree it should be SDL, representable as SDL, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's
Where is the
universal.
first one? It's A.
No,
A
it's
should
like
be possible.
no, it's like Benja suggested right now. He actually suggests that I missed it.
It's not in the doc yet. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not in the doc yet.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and
So
feel free to suggest your own. Same as Benja. So if you,
I've copied these into
okay.
the Google Doc for the notes.
Awesome.
So we can like start maybe editing around that, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, so let's start from the first one, and feel free to stop and suggest your own in the process. So also note order is like random. It's not list of priority list. So first one, it should be possible to subselect metadata values. Idea that
I have.
Yeah.
So basically, if you read my proposal, first, this is where it comes up. The question, is it really a metadata? And I would probably point out again that I'm coming from my big foundational point is comparing directives to .NET attributes and similar things. And there is a good reason for this, because these things look alike and they're very successful there, and they're not very overcomplicated. So first thing, I argue that what we are adding through directives is not a metadata. It's just pieces of custom data. They are not meta. They are attached to metadata elements. But it's custom data. It can be label. It can be any hey, hello from me, you know, anything. It's not meta. And I'm afraid that calling them metadata, it skews our thinking into one direction. Oh, it should be just like __ type. Or it should be something like this. No, it's random crap. And it enables developers in limited groups, like server clients or service framework and implementation, to create a custom mini contracts and send kind of information to each other. So this is my first comment. Second comment is specifically on A.
Okay.
Possible subselect. It's not possible in .NET and nobody cares. Usually it's very limited and nobody needs it.
Okay, so let's, and can I suggest we go point by point, because if couple points, especially if they separate discuss, it's hard to respond. So on the first point, why I call that metadata? So data is what is exposed by server. So in a case like you have GraphQL API representing books, book title, book number, after is the data. Everything about this data is metadata. So by metadata, I mean it's just like academic definition of metadata. So it's data about data. So any crap you attach, any label, any crap you attach to a field, an argument, it's not about a particular book. It's about book as a type. So this is
it's annotations. It's annotations, and anything what you put on there is just annotations or metadata. It doesn't. We shouldn't get stuck on the term. We shouldn't get stuck on the term, I think.
As long as we understand this and agree, that then I'm okay with this. Yeah, let's continue calling them metadata.
Okay, and to clarify, what you think, what you say about, so I explicitly try not to mention directive in solution criteria, directive or any solutions, because we should not design solution criteria.
Okay.
So to explain, basically,
I think Ivan, can I just interject to? We should speed that along. I think we should just go through them and not reject them. Like Benji said, let's just collect them and do a second round, and then we can discuss why it shouldn't be a criteria or why it should be a criteria. I think it's good if we just collect them, because then we get quicker through, and then maybe we even go over them after the meeting and then reject them or whatever. I think let's just go over them, explain them, and then we
and to be fair, and to not create pressure on rejecting something, I will add a note saying they're not final and can be removed.
Of course,
So okay. It's a good comment because it's like half an hour already. So second one, it should be possible to dump all metadata. Basically, it's requirement for metadata to be static. It means you cannot generate random numbers as metadata. You cannot include like current date as metadata, because proxy or schema stores or like documentation generation stuff, like they need to be able to dump metadata. And to describe it in more like hard terms, basically requirement here, you dump metadata and you can generate exact same response for introspection query as target server, because technically you cannot dump introspection right now, because you can follow types, you can create the cycles, but basically you can dump enough information to generate all possible responses. Any quick comments on this one before we switch to the next one?
I think you've actually got two topics there. You've got it should be possible to dump it all, and also it should be static. So I've added L, the metadata must be static.
Example, what would be example of being able to dump it? I mean, okay. You mean
if it's got the date in it, you can still dump it, but it will just be a different dump next time you do it. So static is a separate requirement.
Okay.
What do we mean by static exactly here, though? Because obviously, as the schema changes, the introspection result is going to change. So there is going to be a time when the data does change. How do we define static?
Static is like for one instance of the schema, it will always give you the same values. But if you release a new version of the schema, just same as it is currently, like when the schema doesn't change, the fields don't change, right?
Yeah, just want to make sure we're clear on like, obviously there is a time when it does change, and when that is only if the schema has evolved.
Yeah, and like in my point B, I provide criteria. You should be able to dump stuff in criteria that don't involve version. So you dump stuff and you generate responses. If between dumps something change, it's okay. But if server operate on the same thing and you and the server receive the same introspection query, you should be able to generate the same response. C. Yeah, it's possible to deprecate metadata values using existing deprecation mechanism. And sub-note about that, it should be possible to deprecate metadata usage. So not metadata definition, but metadata usage. Meaning like usually during schema evolution, you first deprecate data provider, data like response, and later you deprecate input or like totally remove it. It's up to you how to do that part, but you should be able to for example, for directives, you should be able to deprecate introspection part without deprecating specification part. So person writing directives in IDE should not have deprecation warning, but person using this thing for introspection should have deprecation warning. If it's clear enough explanation, I will try to work on it if it's not. And so we switch to the next one, right?
Yeah, go on.
Okay. Metadata should be typed and introspectable. I specifically don't say input, output type. It should be typed somehow, and those types should be exposed as introspection, as normal types. So it's all any type of solution struct, input types, anything. But core thing, when you receive response, it should be typed. No matter is it a data or metadata.
Typed in JSON way?
Typed in GraphQL way. So in a sense, you can generate typings for response.
Okay, let's move on.
Yeah, it should be possible to attach semantic meanings to a metadata using existing specified by URL. It's a new one, so it's not actual problem. It's a problem we experience in Apollo. So basically, long story short, for federation, we use SDL as a mechanism. And next problem we experience is like different directive can have the same name, but different like meaning. So directive key can be used for like different stuff and have different meaning. For scalars, we solve it by using specified by. I think at the moment we start exposing metadata, we will experience that problem. So people try to standardize around them, and it needs to be some mechanism saying like avoid name clashes, saying like this thing is mean that thing. And by the way, in Apollo we have already mechanism based on this DL, an idea to have it in this solution.
I feel, yeah, let's just move on. We can discuss it later.
Yeah, I also not sure about.
I understand.
It's yeah, it sounds half like a solution, not as criteria. But yeah, I will maybe try to make it.
It sounds like a specific problem that you have in Apollo, but I think there could be other solutions to that. But let's discuss it later.
Okay. Yeah, F metadata types and values should have description. As part
I
of
added the
special.
types and I was wondering why values specifically, or do we have an idea what values are? Should we just remove the word values?
No. Idea was exactly like values because Roman was speaking about map as solution, and map have a key. So either like fields or keys or something, like if we have a metadata called, I don't know, like experimental, it should be some description attached to experimental inside introspection. So when person looking at query result, the same way person see types, person should see description. Yeah, and switch to next one. Oh, by the way, like important thing is to clarify that, so we're on the same point. So yeah, I agree with Benji. We should not discuss it. Is it like should we remove or add it or change? Yeah, but here, like, if you don't understand what I meant by that, please feel free and we discuss it. So like what we're doing right now. Basically.
Yeah, no, I'm also keeping quiet. I'm just taking in. I think I have some thoughts to the points, but let's move forward and then.
G, it should be possible to attach metadata to metadata definition. Yeah, we need that because, for example, for schema composition, some of the metadata is intended for composer, is intended for things that compose schemas. So we should not expose it further. It's like implementation detail. For example, if we use like schema stitching and use some metadata to define schema stitching, with like metadata should not expose further. So we need some mechanism, future mechanism like to control what expose, what not expose, what expose to certain user but not others users. So some metadata can be part of like a private API, some public API, and we need some mechanism to specify that, not in spec, but as part of solution. Some mechanism to provide it in future. And it's also a real issue for example, for federation. Yeah, and H, this is specifically added based on discussion with Roman, is implementation details shouldn't be exposed as metadata. It's not about secrets. It's about we should not expose all the crap we have on the server. So if something is used during schema, during like schema building time, during server initialization, and it's not meant to be exposed, explicitly not meant to be exposed, we should not expose it. So and basically end of my list. So we go further. All right. It should be representable as SDL. We already discussed it. I think it's the most uncontroversial one. So everybody agree, SDL is first class citizen. Must support.
If I can interject for a moment, since I added most of these.
Yeah.
I wanted to comment that in the Input Unions working group, part of this exercise isn't necessarily to find out what all the solutions, what all the goals are, but also to find out what some of the non-goals are. So some of these I've deliberately stated as if they would be a nice to have, when actually we probably don't want them, we don't care about them, or we explicitly do not want them to be solved. So they're more there as talking points than necessarily things that we should have. Polymorphic data is one that should be discussed. I'm not sure if there is a need for it, but it is, if we decide to not support polymorphic data, that is definitely a decision that we are taking. So we should think about it. Large data, like megabytes of data, like base 64 encoded images or large prose mirror documents or whatever, they may or may not be suitable to go into the schema. Now, GraphQL doesn't actually put any size limits on things, but when we evaluate things, we should at least have in mind how we intend it to be used. Because if you do want large multi-megabyte things to be in the metadata, then part A, sub-selecting metadata values is going to be critical so that you don't have to pull that down every time if you don't need it. L, metadata must be static, we've already discussed. I put in M, it should be clear if changing metadata will break clients. Really, that is, we need to figure out what changing metadata means. Is it a breaking change? Can we change metadata to anything and it's not seen by GraphQL as a breaking change? But if you have your own contract, then that's your problem to govern. Or is there a more spec level idea of breaking changes, like the idea of changing a field from nullable to non-nullable or vice versa? We know concretely whether that is breaking or not. So we at least need to evaluate that and know what our stance is. Should it allow the any data type? I think, again, this is a broader topic. And if you need that, you can just use something like a JSON scalar. But nonetheless, I want to put it in there for discussion, and explicitly, I think we shouldn't allow it. So though I added it, I put reject underneath. And also, should it allow for dynamic data? Like, should we be able to return the current time from one of the introspection fields? Should we have fields that can accept arguments in the introspection? And I explicitly think the answer to that is no, because it prevents the static dumping and the full dumping of the metadata. Nonetheless, I wanted to put it in as a discussion point.
But I mean, we already do have the underbar type that does take a name of a type argument, right?
Yeah, but
yes,
still static. If you do that multiple times with the same input, it always gives you the same.
Sure.
Now it's just like
yeah, sorry. My point is that
I just
explicitly saying we don't want any introspection fields that take arguments may or may not be a fair assumption to make. Like, yes, we do want it to be static, given the same arguments, you always get the same values. And that's derived from a type name that you get from another part of the introspection. But it does seem odd to me to say, no, we should not allow any arguments when we already have an introspection field that does have them.
Yeah,
you're right. The thing how I understood Benji is that you don't specify like dynamic metadata that expose dynamic arguments that then produce dynamic values in that way. That's what I understood.
Yeah, okay. That was kind of my intent.
Isn't it the word?
Sure.
The word idempotent or something for this kind, not static, idempotent. So same arguments, same response. That should be probably used.
It's like half of the definition. Another half is basically like you should be able, because like, for example, we can create mapping +1. If you specify 1, you receive 2. If you specify 2, you receive 3. But we cannot replicate it automatically. So if you dump introspection and run your own server or proxy, you cannot replicate that. So basically, it's not only you receive the same output for the same input, it's also dumping introspection should be enough to replicate this result.
Yeah.
Because like type underscore type is a good example. Introspection query, standard introspection query don't use underscore type, it use underscore schema. And it's contained enough data to power that underscore type. So if we decide, for example, applied directives can have arguments specifying list of directives to return. For example, we can implement subselection that way. It's okay. Or for example, each directive, I don't know how I represent it, but for example, it will return a string, but it accepts a list of like subfields to return it. As long as dumping the whole thing, it's enough to serve any query, introspection query, it's enough.
Cool.
Yeah,
Anything else?
same goes by the way for things like is deprecated. You can pass in the deprecation argument to only get non-deprecated fields and things like that. But that's also replicatable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are there any other criteria we want to add here?
I think, coming from my point of view, is familiarity in similarity to known concepts. I think this is very important factor.
Yes,
like directives.
but we should specify them then. I mean, and that's have you read the document?
That's subjective, I understand, but
no, because it has a specific section with like known solutions, and then we pulled concepts from these known solutions and said looked at these as well.
Yeah,
to exactly have familiarity.
I think we can make
no. Here it's not to borrow ideas. Maybe I think how it works not, but the fact that people come into GraphQL, they have already pre-existing knowledge. And if we map our solution to the pre-existing knowledge, that's a big advantage. Not for our ideas of how to implement.
Can we reformulate it in a sense like readability? So a person who starts with GraphQL and seeing SDL, currently SDL is designed in a way that you can
different.
read it.
It's because I would not put that as a criterion, because there are concepts like also with attributes, like for instance, you didn't like the first of the principles here, Roman. I think that you should have subselects.
Yeah.
In C# you don't need that because you always have the object in memory. But in GraphQL, that is one of the core values, that you can say, I don't want these things because I want to have an efficient service call. So it doesn't work to just take some pre-existing definitions from Java or or C# or so. We have to make them into something that works also with the principles of GraphQL.
If I may, Roman, I think everyone agrees with you there that, like, as much as possible, we should reuse the principles and the concepts that already exist in GraphQL. But I think what Michael was trying to say is, if we're going to say we want to follow the preconceived notions and best practices and guidelines of GraphQL, then we need to outline what those are, or else saying that kind of just isn't really valuable or helps anybody. And if we can't really outline what those are until we have proposed a solution. So I think that naturally that conversation is going to come up as we look at the proposed solutions and say, this solution might be better or tweaked naming or design wise to follow these same principles or practices that we've used throughout GraphQL in the past to maintain familiarity. But that adding that as a blanket statement is overly broad without any specific solution that we're talking about, like how we want to do that to. And it may or may not apply to any specific solution. So making it it's not that we disagree with that approach. It's that adding as a solution criteria feels overly broad in my mind. Is that what kind of where you were trying to get at, Michael?
Okay.
I agree. Yes.
So
Okay.
I can suggest try to capture maybe your intention as a couple separate criteria. Like one of the principles we have in GraphQL is not surprise person. So when person read SDL, he can understand what he's seeing without reading a spec. It's general idea. A query look like response. You can explain concepts easily. So like readability, and by the way, directive in that sense, like have a clear advantage of saying like you can understand what it is. So
yeah, I think we are all on the same page. Roman, do you feel good about like the explanation there?
No,
Okay,
I won't insist. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement that we should try to follow that principle. It just doesn't seem applicable on a broad sense here. It's more applicable to any individual solution.
Yeah, but for A, again, I doubt it should be the criteria about sub-selection. Again, it all depends how much we expect. And again, writing on knowledge from 20 years of .NET, there is not much. Very few attributes is enough or whatever. And we are kind of assuming there would be a lot. And also falling on Benji's notion, would be megabytes or so on. Well, I think it's safe to assume that this is not a lot. If you're a reasonable person, you won't add hundreds of meta elements on a single field. And maybe
hundreds of metadata,
actually not to even to discourage
in the case of
this
Apollo
bad
Federation. In the case of Apollo Federation, they have, for instance, these field sets, which is essentially a selection set that you can define in the key attributes. And that is essentially GraphQL syntax. And that can add up, like if you have a lot of them and distribute them. And I'm just outlining here something. And this could translate even to something better now with metadata, because you don't have to put that in a string anymore. And then you, I'm just not saying that that is something that is in all the solutions, but we can already see there are solutions out there that use that. And also with Hot Chocolate, we have for a stitching solution, we have a similar thing. So there is a lot of metadata in these use cases involved.
I also think that there's a lot of metadata that can appear, especially when multiple schemas are merged together. I mean, places like Netflix have like hundreds of different GraphQL schemas that are merged, and you may add metadata of like, here's where this field came from, or here's where it's modified by, and what information you need. And keep in mind that introspection isn't only used to represent what the schema is. It can also be used at runtime to do things like populating dropdowns. When you're populating a dropdown, you don't need to know every detail of where that field came from. You just need to know what to use for the label, for example. So I personally think that point A is actually really critical. I think we must have subselection of some form.
Yeah, and I also like just to point. Sorry for interjecting. Just point to your company. It's also at Microsoft. I talked to Darren, for instance, from the Microsoft Graph team, and they are also stitching at the moment OData endpoints, but they are also thinking about how they move to GraphQL and how this could be composed there. And they would run into the same problem statements that we just outlined.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and general note about we can learn a lot from programming languages, but they like little bit different use case. In that particular thing, what we can look as an example is OpenAPI. I spent like before GraphQL, I spent like years working with OpenAPI. I built like this directory of like it's thousands of OpenAPI definitions, and people put a lot of crap there, like a lot of things, client-specific things. For example, there is one vendor called Apimatic that generate SDKs code based on OpenAPI definition, and they literally put configuration for every programming language in the OpenAPI definition. So I expect same will happen here. People like will put things specific for like React or like particular language in the schema, and especially since code generation is a big thing now. Like some of that thing should be configurable by person who generates code by client, but people will want to specify code generation specific things like, as Benja said, to represent stuff, translation things. Like Benja used good example in our discussion about like translating things, a description in different language. So description right now in one language. People will want to use metadata for description in different languages. I saw bunch of stuff in OpenAPI world when people put like documentation specific things in metadata.
You know, we came here to get away from REST and OpenAPI and all this nightmare that you are describing. And
yeah, but it will happen.
I hope that won't repeat itself here. I mean, in GraphQL.
Yeah, imagine
My hope.
You building localized graphical in Spanish, so you need everything in English and Spanish. You cannot use the same description.
No.
People...
That I already responded. Reasonable people don't do this. As soon as you have two languages, that's it. You switch to completely different solution. You know.
So outside mechanism for distributing descriptions. Yeah,
because let me tell you, I've been through this, for example, and in order to, let's say you find a typo in some translation, they tell you. So if you have it's in attributes or in directives, it means that you have to rebuild and redeploy everything because of one single typo. And there were cases when, you know, Microsoft had to burn 1 million disks because of one typo in the name of one country.
Yeah, but as implementation, you can store that in database. You can store it metadata. By the way, like we didn't specify that. It's another criteria.
But let's not get stuck on the implementation. These are
I say it's devs are reasonable people. Don't assume that they will do unreasonable things. Even if we give them tools to do unreasonable things.
Not all devs. No.
I understand.
But the main use case I really see is really distributed schemas, and they use today already a lot of metadata. That's what I just wanted to point out. But we shouldn't get stuck on the topics yet. I think when we have concrete proposals, we can do in-depth discussions, because Hugh is already gone. And do we want to do a
We're out of
cut
time.
or go on? What? Yeah, it's an hour. I think we have a good couple of things to think on. I mean,
Yeah. The only other thing I'd like to add. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ivan.
Oh no, it's actually valuable. So
Okay.
Miguel,
The only other thing I would like to add is I think that we need a more specific story about why this is useful, what the use cases here are. Like the GraphQL guiding principles do say favor no changes and cater solutions to use cases. And right now, I personally understand that like Apollo Federation is a use case for this. But if that's the only use case, I'm not sure how compelling it is. And for people who are coming in and looking at this RFC that don't work at Apollo, they're not going to intuitively immediately understand like why this is important. So I think we need to come up with an explanation and some examples of how custom metadata fields can be valuable to get people doing different things with GraphQL.
Yeah.
I didn't just to point out, it's not Apollo in specific. It's distributed schemas as a whole. There are Hasura, my company is doing that. Apollo is doing that. Like it's one of the use cases, distributed schemas, where it's very useful to have metadata. So it's not just Apollo. It's like a whole bunch of companies that doing similar kind of products.
Definitely. If the only use case we can come up with is for distributed systems, then I think that is an important thing to recognize as like, let's cater this towards that specific solution. If it's not, and we can come up with other use cases that may be far more arbitrary and expansive, then we should come up with other use cases and give examples so that we are designing this with what we're actually intending to solve in mind.
Yeah, I definitely have many alternative use cases for it. I've wanted this for a long time. For
awesome. I would love to hear what those
distributed.
Are. Awesome.
By the way, I think regarding distributed and large schemas, this is, I suspect this currently what we have a workarounds, because this is a separate big problem waiting for solutions. Where we solve it with extra metadata, or I believe there must be some real solution for this. So we have to keep this in mind.
Another example of stuff, I think like stuff that people volunteer to write is a run subcommittee as
yes,
schema composition is big use case. Another use case is like experimental idea that experimental or like there is this RFC for adding feature flags. It's the same. You need it for docs, you need it for warnings. And a good source of use cases is like an issue about exposing directives that all created. I forget the number, but we probably all know about this like big long issue, multi-year issue. So people there provide enough use cases, so we just need to like choose the best one and document. Yeah, but I totally agree. It should be there, and especially since in the last discussion, Warren, for example, had this question. So it's not even for people outside working group. It's also inside working group, and to make discussion productive. Yeah, and document why we added in the first place.
We either break now or make a 5-minute break, to be honest. Because
I suggest,
no, let's cut them.
Yeah, I suggest cutting it. Yeah, because we agreed on 1 hour. One thing, if we can spend a couple minutes discussion action points, what we want to do before next one. About the date of next one, we can do asynchronously in a thread. But what different?
Let's just be active on. Let's just be active on the threads of discussion. Let's agree.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
It's good one. And So is it okay to use one discussion thread that I'm like organized with co on, or separate one? Yeah, this one. So everybody okay with that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I think
Except one thing, I thought technically it might be better for discussing issues maybe in separate. That's why I started separate with directives, purely directives, right? So keep in mind. I hope it's okay, right?
Can we organize category?
Yeah,
I think maybe we can organize
no,
category
but
discussions.
yeah, in input units, we did the same thing essentially. Like we had separate documents for the separate proposals in the end.
Yeah.
So we should have one document where we outline the points that we, the criteria and stuff like that, like an overview also into these things, and then separate, because if we discuss competing solutions in the same thread or in the same discussion, it becomes very confusing. I would think.
Yeah.
Okay. As action point, I will add like aggregate stuff from that document, and basically we'll update PR from draft and ping you all, so you can do review. We merge it, and we continue to work on it as a live document, so everyone can participate and add stuff. So right now we've worked on adding new criteria we discussed here, and on writing description. Yeah, I will try to write something short just to have it, and then we can expand and work on it asynchronously. Anything else before we finish?
Are you safe? Ivan, are you safe?
In Ukraine,
in Ukraine.
Are you okay, right? Everything's good out there right now?
Yeah, I'm but
Are you in Lviv?
Yeah, I'm in Lviv, so I'm not near the front line or anything. There is some issue with draft and other things, but there is no immediate problems. And yeah, there is some issues I need to deal with, but at the same time, country is dealing with the same issue. So no big immediate danger to me. Basically, short answer.
Слава Україні.
Героям слава. Thanks. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. It's Ukrainian. Anything else before we finish? Yeah. So.
Stay safe.
Yeah. Thanks.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah.